Time grief we go, gotta learn to let it go. Once asleep, now awake, feeling every breath you take.
Welcome to Wake the F Up podcast, hosted by Alix and David Long, where we talk about living consciously and helping people uncover their essential selves so that they can stop sleepwalking through life. Our goal is to create a safe space where our guests can share how they've decided to wake the F up and become mindfulness experts through their own emotional healing journey. Welcome to Wake the F Up podcast. I am your host, Alix Long, along with my co-host and husband, David Long. And you might notice today we are coming in real sterile from David's office. It is the month of May, and so we are talking about all things mothering, the mother of all months, as we like to call it. And to be fair, as a mother, it is the mother of all months, actually. May just surely is. Not only is Mother's Day happening this month, but we have 3 children graduating. We have 15 family members attending a graduation tomorrow.
Lots of
we are the hostesses, the mostest, and everyone's coming in town. So
lots of boundaries to be put down, lots of boundaries to be violated in the next 48 hours.
Here I am in this office because we needed to save time and run so many errands today that we got it done here. And we also squeezed in a old lady MFM appointment this morning. So, you know, advanced maternal age, they call it geriatric pregnancy. Can I get some listeners to high-five me on the internet and tell me who in the F came up with that name? And whoever it is, and most likely a man, sorry, but most likely a man needs
It probably wasn't, actually.
to have a conversation, or a very, very mad female. Anywho, so it's been a busy day, and we are so excited to get talking about such a hot topic, and actually something that I feel like in the longer that I do trauma work and somatics, the more that I find generational trauma to be one of the things I coach on the most. So I think I do somatic and trauma coaching, and so it's trauma and somatics. Essentially, you have the trauma first, and then I teach you how to somatically get inside your body and get out of your head, but get into your inner system and heal your nervous system through your body. And in that work, it's really, really transformative for generational trauma, because sometimes our head will spin stories on repeat, and they're very subconscious belief systems that are laid down very early, as we talked about in attachment theories. Like some of these are rooted in 6 months, years old on from our parents, right? From our mothers. And generational trauma can be, so long-standing. It's mother to mother to mother. We're going to just talk about mothers today because we're in the month of mothering, but next month we'll talk about this, about generational trauma from your father and like how that's different from your mother. But our mothers are meant to love us no matter what. They're meant to nurture us. They're meant to physically hold, rock us, skin to skin, if you think about it, and holding your baby. And even like the way that your uterus and the baby sits inside of you, it's just everything about that is like one giant hug, essentially. And I think physical contact, physical attention and presence with our children as a mother is really the thing you can do to connect the most. So we as humans need connection and we need safety, and those come from both parents, of course, but a deep amount of connection comes from our mothers. And in that, we feel safe that she will answer our call when we need her. It's almost like, even as a mother now, whenever I have a crisis, it is a visceral call that I need my mother, especially when I have every child I've ever had delivered. There's this period right after my children are born where I really want my mom. And that's like, I think you can feel that too, right? Like there is a deepness when you just like need your mom, and almost no one else can replace that. So my mom has always been amazing about that. Like she's wonderful in those kind of crisis moments and generally comes to the call.
I think it's different for a man, for sure.
Yeah.
There's a point in the relationship between a man and their mother where the distance is required.
Got it.
Where you don't even want to admit you have a mother.
Yeah, I felt that from my
And
own
you certainly don't want to admit to yourself that she continues to influence you or hover in any way, and it's just a big denial of motherhood. I think a lot of men go through that.
Why do you think that is?
I think there's lots of reasons for it. I think the primary one is probably sexual, honestly. I've thought that for a long time. Freud thought that as well. That there is a point in a young boy's life where the only female really that he is intimate with or has close contact with is his mom. And the sexual desires get very confusing. And I think that is a non-starter, so you react by pushing the woman away. Also, you are looking to other women for emotional and physical satisfaction, where you used to get emotional, physical satisfaction from your mom.
Yeah, that makes
so you
sense.
push the mom away in order to make space for your mate, the mother of your children, so to speak.
Yeah.
That's not just my opinion. That's an opinion. Other things are just the independence. I mean, it's like a second weaning.
Right.
You have to wean yourself off of it. And that's not just the mom, but it's particularly the mom, since they're kind of tend to be the more emotional caregivers, and you have to push that away to
Gain independence.
Yeah.
Got it.
I think that's what.
No, and we talked about that last week, which was really interesting, which is like, there is this push-pull between, children growing up and gaining independence. And so in the independence, it's like the feeling of loneliness or being alone is heightened in that state where you're trying to be independent and you don't want to ask for help. It's like those themes carry, I think, for the rest of our life.
I think also for a man, you come to the realization that there is a difference between you and your mom. And so you tend to gravitate more to your dad as a role model of what it means to be a man, what it means to be masculine. And the mother is the anti-masculine, right? So it results in a push away.
Got it. So different for women. I think actually there's the same kind of friction in teenage years where your mother, and I might be just speaking from a personal lens, but you and your mother have friction as well. It's a different kind of friction where I think the mother might see a lot of herself in her daughter. I also think it is common for the mother to have some feelings of loss or jealousy. Is it farther into the spectrum when looking at their teenage daughter for her youth and vitality and things that inevitably change as you get older, when your kids get older. And then I think oftentimes the relationship between the father and the daughter can sometimes cause some friction between the mother and the daughter. So where the dad might be doting and see the daughter in a certain way, maybe the father doesn't treat the mother like that anymore, or that was a pretty big thing in my house. I would say that before my father and I got estranged, we were very close, and my mother and I were very much butting heads in teenage years. And so as I was in coming of age time, my father definitely was swept to the rescue. And I think that was challenging for my mother because my dad had a hard time showing up for her. And so that would often result in some friction. But these are more inner child wounds, right? We're talking about things that we receive from our parents in our home, and that's your childhood wounds, right? But when we're talking about generational trauma, we're looking at it from the lens of what are the things that have been passed from mother to mother to mother to mother to mother. You might notice that you are suffering from a generational trauma when you have maladaptive coping strategies. Often my somatic clients will come in with chronic pain, chronic headaches, belly aches, neck, always kind of chronic neck pain, back pain, you name it. So like chronic pain, fatigue, inability to manage their stress, poor coping strategies. So a lot of times substance abuse or checking out and somehow overworking, sexual dysfunction, drugs, alcohol, anything to numb or take away the inner monologue, which is, I'm not lovable. At the deeper seat of things. And so chronic stress, physical health, interpersonal relationship issues. So you might avoid conflict, right? You might be very aggressive and you might have a lot of anger. that your mother had or didn't have, right? You might have a mother who was very, very argumentative and you were always in the wrong. Or you might have a mother who was passive and stonewalled, as they call it in the psychological world, which is just a term that says, like, basically anytime it gets emotional, a wall goes up and you push out any emotional discussion and connection. And that can be quite damaging as well. I think sometimes parents think that that's actually better to hold your emotions together or hold them in. That's not staying regulated or attempting to get back to regulation. That's actually shutting out emotions and teaching your children we're not allowed to have dialogue and we shouldn't feel. And that can be challenging.
Well, I think that's a perfect example of multi-generational trauma. If the grandparent had some trauma that was so painful that they had to protect themselves by shutting down, and then they carry that mode on and pass that on to their children by basically any emotional thing being unavailable.
Yeah, I mean, I can see a direct lineage in my mother to my grandmother. And of course, my grandmother died at 63 of cancer, so relatively young. I think I was in 5th grade. I never got the opportunity to ask her much about her mother, but my mother and I actually talked about this week, which has been kind of cool to be able to dive in a little bit with her. But I can see directly codependency has run from me to my mother, to my mother's mother, and I'm going to go ahead and guess it was to her mother as well. So it's 4 generations deep. Codependency is when you're a person who is intuitive. We often call ourselves empathic. We read rooms. We know how to solve problems before even someone has verbalized they have a problem. Usually you're good in high-stress situations. You want to fix things for everyone all the time. You want everyone to be okay. You go to great lengths to keep everyone happy. You get to the point where you go to such great lengths to keep people happy that you're doing everyone's work for them all the time and not allowing them to make their own mistakes or even know that you're having issues while trying to do their work for them. That we build a lot of resentment and anger. And I would say that lineage probably runs the most deeply in my family, down to me. And I don't think I caught that I had codependency until Carl was diagnosed with cancer. And actually, I was burning out when we went to his surgery. And Carl was also codependent, very much so. He always made everything look, incredibly perfect, really. He was incredible at holding up so many things in the air and making it look very easy. Anyone who ever worked with him and knew he was calm as a cucumber on the surface and could run the most chaotic scenarios as though he was the calmest person. I think deeply inside he was actually managing a decent amount of anxiety and stress. And once his surgery happened, I don't know if I've ever shared this, but it was pretty intense. He had an anastomosis, that's a suture line that was very significant, and he wasn't allowed to lift 5 pounds at first. All the chest tubes, the breathing tubes, he had to relearn how to eat, breathe, use the bathroom. His entire GI tract was rerouted. And when we went home, our kids were, as I've said before, out of the house for almost a month, and we had PTOT, everyone came home to support care. And he really wanted to be better and get back to work. The pressure of missing work for that long, right? 6 weeks, 12 weeks. I think he went back to work in January and his surgery was in July, and he had massive amounts of chemo and radiation prior to that, which made him very ill. So he was really missing a lot of work. And the minute that he got out of that, we realized that he still had cancer in his body. And so we had to keep doing treatment. So it was really stressful. Not only to rehab from the surgery for 6 months, but then to know that you had to keep going on treatment was a gut punch. Anyway, long story short, in all of this, he stayed positive, and we were blogging positivity just to get our story out there because so many people were so loving and helpful. He was writing menus from home, really sick. The kids managing, just so many things we were managing, and our stress level was through the roof. And you wouldn't know it that he was stressed. You just wouldn't have known it. And there was a day where something happened where he committed to something, and I was like, there's no way you can do that. And he took our coffee table in our living room, and he had we were still rehabbing from surgery, picked the coffee table up, and threw it against our wall. It shattered the coffee table. He wasn't supposed to pick up more than 5 pounds. Very luckily, nothing happened, but had he have bled in that situation, we would have been in a very severe crisis. And I remember thinking at that moment, this is way beyond us managing this ourselves. Like, our stress level, our anger, I mean, it was devastating to be re-diagnosed and essentially to still have 14 of 41 lymph nodes positive with cancer after the most amount of radiation a body can handle and the most amount of chemotherapy that body can handle before surgery. And so at the time I realized like how much he was trying to make it better for everyone and not dealing with his own grief that he was really, really sick. And in that re-diagnosis essentially, or lack of getting fully cleared, his survival rates went really, 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 really to poor prognosis. And it was already a very poor prognosis for the get-go. But what I'm saying about this is codependency. So it's when you shove everything you have down to make everyone around you happy, and you keep getting up and showing up for everyone, but inside you're like, it's a ticking time bomb, or you're stressed, you might have headaches, you might be exhausted, you're not sleeping, you're not eating, you're drinking alcohol to like maybe try to get some rest because your head's running 1,000 miles an hour, and you might have allergies, you might have stomach aches, you have like all these physical manifestations of illness and stress. And yet you still get up every day and do for everyone else all the time and don't check in with what you need or say what you need. We found our my now trauma therapist then, and that was, 12 years ago, 11 years ago, something like that at this point. And I laughed saying that my oldest is graduating, and he was 3 when I found her. He's graduating from 8th grade. And so it's been a long journey, but that was the first thing she diagnosed both of us with. So we were highly codependent. And when I look back at our motherly lines, we came from long lines of caregivers. Both our parents were nurses. Even though my grandmother didn't work, I mean, she cared for 14 children, and my grandfather had a substance abuse issue. I mean, he struggled with alcohol socially. He was a functional alcoholic, but it definitely defined my mother's home, and it was also not talked about, much like many of our parents' issues. And so that was confusing. My mom didn't realize her dad had a drinking problem until she was, I think, 30 or 35. Yeah. My mom's brother committed suicide, a really tough topic. And there was just a lot of shove it down and perform, and shove it down and look good, shove it down and have money, success, the right look, right? Keep it all together. It was very much like the subliminal message from my mother's family. And even into me and cancer, and now even, I really have to break this now. I have to be conscious of it, or I get back into these patterns subconsciously. But keeping it all together and looking right has been a subconscious theme of my entire life. Like, you have to have the right body and the right job and enough money and the right Christmas cards, and your kids need to behave a certain way, and manners, and it's that part isn't, the perfectionism is not necessarily codependency, but the codependency part is then, if you want all that perfectionistic behaviors to make sure everyone looks right, you actually do the work to get everyone there, right? So you drag everyone, like, you can think about the mother who has everyone in smocked outfits, and then your kids are having explosive diapers and throwing tantrums at these fine dining restaurants, and God forbid that happens, you got to keep it all together, and it has to look right with a monogram. And
yeah, I was gonna say the child on an airplane, you're so anxious.
Oh, exactly, right. So never just being a human with flaws exposed, right? And many of us suffer from this as women. It's ingrained in me to be the mother that has it all right, and it still happens today.
Yeah, and the parents that all they ever talk about is how great their kids are and what their kids are doing, and their entire personality is invested in their kids' success. And
a lot of us who have that feeling of really our kids having everything they need, it's becoming from this space inside of us, and this is a generational trauma wound where your parent couldn't show up for you because they got so codependent or so obsessed with this one facet of not being who their mother was to them and everyone around them that hurt them, that they then swung the opposite way. But But the part of the generational trauma that stays within each of the lineages is the inability to connect on an authentic way. And we talk about that a lot, right? So when you're not being your true self or not being vulnerable and you're not talking about your shame or you're not getting some of these stories out, you continue to perpetuate the isolation of the truth of who you are and what happened to you. And in that, you create ideals where there is truths behind that you're not giving to your children. And then there's confusion between, the way that you act is very, very different from the way that you feel on the inside, because you're actually acting out of, I don't want to do this fear of you becoming or having me be this person that my mother was to me or my mother's mother was to her. I want to stop that. But instead of dealing with the trauma itself and how you're just hurt and it wasn't their fault, they didn't mean to hurt you, they did it out of love and swung too far the other way or whatever happened. Maybe they did actually really hurt you and maybe it really was like a bad situation that they couldn't apologize for. But, I like to give people mostly the benefit of the doubt. Even the worst case scenarios, it's usually people's best, and usually the person above them that taught them to parent, they gave their best. And sometimes those bests are really shitty and don't even deserve a real forgiveness. They deserve an understanding that was the best that they had, and that is your forgiveness. It's not necessarily like we have these great relationships. Some of us need to actually separate from our families in some degree. So that's what we're really talking about, which is how do we break these things that are subconsciously handed to us, and maybe stories that honestly we don't even know our mother carries. If our mother is I'm lucky my mother is not tightly wound. Like, she doesn't keep things to herself. Her mother did. Her mother was extremely buttoned up, and we're not talking about this, and you're going to pray about it, Yeah,
I
did the opposite.
I think a lot of this really requires a third-party perspective. And I think most people probably aren't capable of really analyzing the motivation behind this behavior without someone else saying, hey, you're kind of hurting yourself doing this, or you're not living your true self. Because, I can just speak for myself, that I thought for a long time that if you weren't pretty anxious all the time, that you were unhealthy, you were a bad parent, you were a bad husband, that it was dangerous.
Yeah.
And it took a third-party perspective to tell me or to show me that, hey, number one, this is not helping, right? You're not relieving this feeling, and it's really hurting your interpersonal relations. But I was completely clueless. In fact, I know a lot of people that if you did confront them about this kind of thing would tell you you're crazy, that you're just irresponsible.
Right. And that's okay too. So there's always going to be categories of how people handle trauma, stress, and familial line of generational trauma. That's pretty deep. The skeletons in the closet, we will always have the subset of people who really can't go there, and they're not capable of going there, and that's okay. Those probably are not going to be our listeners.
Yeah,
but they may be someone that you love.
My point is that I think multi-generational trauma can be some of the most subconscious behavior and the most difficult to tease out. Why am I doing this? Is this positive? Is this negative? Because it's generally that behavior has been promoted and supported in that family circle.
It actually is definitive of your family line. Right. So often what we call tradition, or if you look at like family crests, or like even like when you think of your family energy, these. All
right, think about with the knives and forks on the plate, on the table thing.
Manners.
It's passed down. That's not. No, that's not
table manners.
No. The way you put the forks and the knives is not table manners. It's table etiquette, maybe, but it's not.
The manners is the behaviors that you set, and actually,
my point is like if
the table setting.
Let's say you have a Thanksgiving thing where the multi-generational people come,
right?
And someone higher up, maybe she didn't put the knives on the right side and the forks on the. And
that would be my family for sure.
Probably fucking that up, and then that gets judged. Not directly to you, but it gets judged to the person that was supposed to teach you that who didn't. And then when your kids don't do it, then you get judged for not teaching them.
Like, this is still an unhealed trauma of mine for sure. Like, and actually my mom and I have a good laugh about it. Like, I can remember being 3 years old my grandmother used to throw like the Great Gatsby style parties because they had so many children, they had so many friends. It was just like a huge family. She would just throw these extravagant dinners and everything would have china and like, I mean, the whole place sitting would be out. And we'd go to dinners. She usually liked nicer restaurants, white tablecloths, the whole thing. 3 years old in a diaper, I was getting fussed at because I didn't sit still in my chair. When Carl was very sick, my niece was being baptized. I'm her godmother. And we were in and out of the hospital all week. And I remember this actually tells many generational trauma lines here. I was about to cancel going to the baptism because I was exhausted and hadn't slept all week because I'd been sleeping in the hospital. Something crazy was going on. And so I called to cancel and my sister was super upset. And generationally speaking for her, a lot of times my parents didn't show up. People didn't show up for her because she was like a lot of middle child feelings. And truly a lot of people did not show up for her because she was always like the good one who did all the things. And so that of course hit her childhood wound. And then I, of course, being the codependent person I am, didn't take care of myself. Much like my mother, I shoved it down and was like, you know what, screw it. I'll throw the kids in the car. I'll drive from New Orleans to Nashville. By the way, if anyone's ever driven from New Orleans to Nashville, there's like 2 routes. And the scenic route, which is usually the shorter route, I think, or I just took that because it was like a map situation back in the day, or GPS, or I went the wrong way, who knows. But it took me literally through the mountains, okay? Through the mountains. I had a 1 2-year-old and a 4 or 5-year-old, toddlers, by myself, hadn't slept all week. Almost like fog descended, couldn't see, had to pull over, and it was like 2 a.m, sleep in some horrible motel, could have killed myself. Arrive at 6 a.m. the next morning. I think I slept in the hotel room for a few hours. Kids are crying, cranky, diapers are not, everything's wrinkled. We have a fine dining situation again, and my mom's sister is there. And my mom's sister doesn't have children. But she sure did get a lot of the generational thought process on being perfect at the table. Obviously, that was very deeply instilled in her. My youngest, energetic is a gentle way of putting her general energy, but she was exhausted, sat in church really well the whole time. I was up, doing the baptismal ceremony. Mommy had been in the hospital all week. It had been a really hard week for everyone. Long car ride, terrible sleep, and here we go. She's jumping in her chair at the restaurant. She's not even bad, just not sitting down. And standing on the chair and eating her whatever, chicken finger, and just, the best thing about my daughter is that she's always got a smile on her face, and she's always like in full joy, but full of energy. Bottle it up, we'd make $1 million. And my aunt, could not let this go. She lost it on me about how she needs to sit in her chair and behave herself. And I was like, I started sobbing. I lost it because I had been trying to hold it all together. Oddly enough, it triggered the shit out of my mom too, because my mom was like, you have no idea what just happened the week before with this whole situation. She's having a terrible time, and this is her being... So my mom was able to defend my daughter, but I know that we had been working on letting go of some of that, perfectionism at the table. It's not realistic for your toddlers, But this is exactly what we're talking about, where until it's healed, and you can only sort of heal that as a mom when you're at a certain point, you gotta let this go. You either don't go to the fancy restaurant, or you do go, expose your children, and they do their best and they learn, manners or whatever. They're not gonna be perfect. You're gonna have to maybe leave the table a few times, So it was an interesting generational line where I was getting hit with lots of things and trying to be for everyone.
That really is a good example, because I think a lot of the cases of manners and etiquette and all that kind of stuff really has nothing to do with the kids at all. It's really about
how well you were parenting
and how we can control the chaos. The chaos should be controlled. And
well, this is very much from the line of children should not be heard.
Right.
They should be seen but not heard, which I'm it's the most retarded and idiotic thing I've ever heard.
I mean, I subscribed to that for a long time because for the same reasons I was trying to control my anxiety and my chaos. And we've talked about Baby Wise before, but that's like the ultimate, like, that was a book literally sold, like in the preamble, it tells you that if you follow these guidelines, it will help control your life. Like, not nothing to do with the kids. It just can make you can be a professional and have a kid if you follow these rules.
So it's helpful to think about this as a parent now, and I think David's right? The best way to work on this is if there's something in your own mother or something that your mother may have subconsciously told you that you have to do that you don't align with. I find the best way to heal generational trauma is of course, see a trauma therapist, because when you start to pull some of this longevity of trauma out from your entire family line and these expectations that were put on you that you couldn't meet, that's where the unlovable vibes come. That's where the lack of safety is in the changing of the self.
Actually, I was just thinking, like, I think our grief and our just what we've been through in regards to emotional capacity really has made me question a lot of the expectations and all the things that I did, not for myself, but for the appearances. And in that grief, I let a lot of it go. Or you don't have a choice. You have to let it go, or you will be swallowed up. That's the way I felt. Like,
no, that's 100% accurate.
I felt like if I kept trying to do this after Betsy died, that I would be swallowed up.
That's a leg up. So there are like these glimmers. It's not really a glimmer, but it's like there are these back end positives that come from being in deep grief. I mean, you look at the world so differently. You value life so much more than you ever did because you know how fragile it is. It's like you learn to love deeper and feel more, but you have to let so many things go that were once important to you. And it's a lot of external layers that you have to release because immediately upon becoming a widow, you are criticized for everything and every decision you make. And so the general criticisms that most parents carry, you find a way to kind of juggle and at least surfacely get with a group of peers that are similar, right, and accept you for who you are in that station before the death. But afterwards, like if you're holding up juggling all these balls, which most moms are, like the Pinterest moms, right? Like it's like everything's trying to look right and our house has to look right and the kids have to look right and all that. Like that all falls because when your children are hysterical and triggered all the time, like there would be days where it would just be like, and still, we still have these days.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Can we just get to
stop?
Can we just, our kids will never, I don't know that they'll ever, I mean, the space between the meltdowns is about every quarter.
We still have weekends where I will think, okay, I really need to work on the kids with blank. You know, whatever behavior that is not desirable. And sometimes on a Saturday morning I'd be like, or I could just let them rest.
Right.
And we spend a lot of time.
All of us need a lot more rest.
We spend a lot of time letting our kids just rest and not
heal.
Yeah.
And rest. And there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people cannot handle that. That's a major generational trauma in your family. And I feel like, and maybe mine too, the busying of the self. Like, if you're not productive, you won't survive. If you're not wealthy.
Well, that one's really interesting because that is 100% a coping strategy for anxiety, staying busy, Mm-hmm. But it's so codified that it's not just a coping strategy. It's literally a way of life, and it's a way you judge others' lives based on their level of activity, which you're literally only doing to calm your own self. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But you're expecting the whole world to use that same coping strategy. And if they don't, then they're...
Well, this is when survival is a threat. So you'll know it's a generational trauma when you feel that your own survival is threatened if you don't do this.
Right. That's right.
And remember, we're supposed to feel safe in our home environment. We're supposed to feel accepted. We're supposed to be able to peel off the external layers, leave it at the front door. Ideally, we create a community, throughout our life where we don't have to put a layer on anywhere, but especially in our homes, right? And so when you feel this much guilt and shame around something, I have to do this. I must do this. I'm dreading, and almost all of my somatic coaching clients will say this. It's this dread to do the things, and the heaviness in their body, and the headache that they feel, and the exhaustion. And these are maladaptive coping strategies that lead to stress on a surface level. And a long game level, they lead to autoimmune disorders and substance abuse problems, because you are putting so much energy towards something that's not authentically serving you and what you need.
Yeah, I mean, you're being motivated by external forces, not internal forces.
And people pleasing is a huge one. So like pleasing our families, pleasing our grandmothers, pleasing our mothers and fathers, pleasing our siblings, like all of that. Like, you have to do this in our family, and in this family we do blank.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know where that came from, but like individuality, the black sheep might be the person in your family that actually is like, no, I'm done with this.
And then typically we'll hang things on that premise to prove it, right? So,
right. There's always proof.
Look how successful you are. Look how...
Right. I kept you here and you are this very successful doctor because I controlled all these narratives for you. Well, I just studied hard and had wonderful opportunities.
What is it our friend said about his dad? He says, I'm doing this to spite you, not because of you.
Yeah, we had this amazing dinner one time with a bunch of like family friends that were in David's family, and it was this great trip, and like all the parents are, of course, like post-war babies, these baby boomers as our kids call them. And I mean, they're hilarious. Like, it's actually like, I get a lot of material for our podcast, just like, because it's not my family, so it's not triggering me up. I'm like, I just get to like sip a glass of wine when I'm not pregnant and watch it all go down.
But that was the situation where the dad was kind of taking a little bit of credit for the son.
No. The son was telling me how he had started. Okay, so the son is a high-level doctor. He's very anxious, but he's working out of his anxiety. So he was being super vulnerable. Of course, I being a little bit empathic and love to talk deep, like get him to open up to all this stuff about how stressed he is and like how's he deal with stress. And he'd started a meditation practice. And so he was doing, I forget which meditation app he was using, but he was like evangelical about it, how it's changed his life. And so we were like, I was like, oh, tell me more. And so he was like telling me about how he was doing this meditation app, and his dad is sitting to his right and was like, this sounds like a bunch of sissy horse shit. Like, exactly like, I mean, that if that doesn't sum up probably what his father told him and his father's father told him, that like, why the hell is his son trying to do all this feeling shit? And I was like, Jesus, this is hilarious. And we're talking more about mothers, but this is like, goes both ways, of course. And so the son was like, no, Dad. And his dad was like, I don't know why you'd be doing that. And the son was like, I'm not doing this to spite you. I'm doing this to heal from you.
Because of you.
Because of you. And it was just so comical. And it went right over the dad's head. He was like, yeah, whatever. Like he couldn't even listen, right? Because he wasn't going to engage in feelings. And like, he loved his son, but like, there was a stone wall or a block for him that, like, I think a lot of our baby boomer parents, who, if unless they get a lot of healing, they just throw a wall up and are like, no freaking way, we're not going there. And I mean, even with my mother, like, we are tiptoeing into, and it's challenging sometimes for her, especially obviously this month, she was like, it's been a little hard, and she's very brave and like listens, and we're thinking about things, and we have dialogue about the podcast afterward. More and more each week. It definitely didn't start that way. It started a little bit of eggshells in my home. My mom lives with us, so it's, there's no avoiding it. And David's mom will send us a message every week about her thoughts on the podcast, and then her explanations for her why, which is cool.
It's been interesting because we spent a lot of time talking about how you have to forgive your parents because they did the best that they could. But there's some...
You don't have to forgive your
parent.
parent.
There's some forgiveness the other way, that the parents themselves have to kind of come to grips with.
They have to forgive themselves.
Right.
And actually, like, you don't have to forgive your parent. I actually think that's like a really toxic statement, no offense.
Accept their parent, I guess.
Well, and I know what you mean. Like, if you are lucky enough to be able to get to understanding and have a present parent who's open enough for dialogue, how awesome was that you get to heal generation trauma? Because that's really what it comes down to. So if things are really severe enough where it's blocking you from the truth of who you are to your parent, and that's the thing where I am with my mom right now. Like, I'm really proud of us because I think somewhere in the last few years, I finally worked through my father wound. Next month will be interesting because I have a lot more to say about the father side of things, because I have done years and years and years on my father stuff. But all of a sudden, when I felt like I had settled into how I was accepting that we are going to be where we are forever, and that I forgive him for decisions he made. I'm not going to be able to have a dialogue with my dad about, why he was the way he was. But my mom has lived with me on and off and helped us through cancer. Would never have made it where I am today without my mother. So it's weird. We have a juxtaposition where we almost don't talk about any of the things or the wounds that I have, because my dad was such a dust kicker that he was the one who always flared up the peacock feathers and got all the attention. My mom is steady Eddie, and she's always there. And so it's a little more challenging when you have a good relationship with your parent to say, actually, this is how I felt growing up. And since I have become more verbal about her depression, I think it's been challenging for her because it is a social norm that when we grew up, and especially when she grew up, it didn't have a lot of language around it. It wasn't accepted. And of course, there's guilt around something you have and can't control, right? You can control, but it is out of control in your body and you have to manage it. It's a managing kind of disease. And so, this genealogy is passed down to a lot of my siblings and some of our kids and you name it. And so it's just something to discuss. And I felt like I'm not going to heal, and we're not going to have an authentic relationship. And I really want that for us. If I don't start to speak my truth about some of the impacts that the depression had on me growing up, and why some of these inner voices of being alone and not lovable might have come from her as much as it came from my father. And when you're depressed, you cannot see outside of depression sometimes. And that's challenging because the memories of who you were in that moment, and I think even as a mother, even if you're not depressed, it's sometimes when you have a lot going on and a lot of emotional trauma to heal, or a lot of things to work on in generational trauma, if you haven't healed, you don't even know how you're presenting yourself to your family.
No.
You don't even know how you're showing up in the world. And when I look back at myself, to my mother's credit, everything I've done up until this time in our life, and even I'm more conscious today, I would say I'm definitely waking up. But 4 years ago, 3 years ago, I was not. I was asleep in lots of ways in my life, codependent. My friendships were built on some fundamentals that were giving. And then the resentment builds. And so then you're actually resentful, and it's not healthy. It was a lot of anger. All of these were generational messages handed to me from the lineage of women in my family and my father as well. So I carried those into my relationships, and that's how I started my marriage, and that's how I started my mothering, and that's how I started everything. It wasn't until that table hit the wall and shattered and he could have killed himself in rage that I had no idea he had, that I was we need help. We need a therapist. And so I highly recommend you get one. But the secondary piece of that is getting comfortable enough with yourself and how you feel on the inside so that you can distinguish what is coming from where, right? Where did this come from, and what happened in your childhood, and what are these voices and that were given to you? What are the stories in your brain that are telling you to stay safe? So a lot of the stories in my head are, I'm always going to be left alone. I'm never going to be good enough. I'm never going to be good enough is a common one for people who came from perfectionistic, controlling homes. And in fact, my mother, with her depression, would be unable to be present a lot of the time. But when she was present, it was I think she wanted to regain control of the home and of her position, and to feel like she had control over something. And so a lot of times it would be the table manners, the house, the cleanliness, the way we dress, the way we look, the way we behaved, the way we practice religion, that. And so I carried a lot of that with me. The mother's role is to do instead I softened it. I didn't want to be angry. And so I softened it and did I'm going to do everything for my kids all the time. And that was a disaster. And I remember my therapist back in the day said, simple thing that we could talk to most mothers is like, every day I pack the diaper bag or the school bags and lunches and all the stuff. And then, God forbid, there's a day where you might raise the white flag and have the flu or need some help. And I remember this is like, when I let Carl do the bag packing, everything was like not the way I wanted it. It's like when someone loads the dishwasher and you're like, why the hell did you put the plates there? And it's like throws you off your game. And my therapist was like, why the hell are you doing all this? Like, you have a husband, he will help. You didn't ask for help, and when he does help, you criticize it because it's not done perfectly. And I was like, well, I didn't want him to lay out the clothes and dress the kids because the last time he dressed them, they looked like homeless, like they literally had like no socks on and like their hair was ragamuffiny and you hear the words coming out of my mouth now. Like now that makes me embarrassed to say that out loud because it doesn't matter. But back then that really mattered to me because appearances really mattered to me. That was ingrained in me that like you needed to have it look right, And it's funny that like what I learned was that as I was controlling everything and codependently doing everything, I was also building deep space between Carl and I and resentment. And I was also not letting him father. And then I was teaching my children that a father didn't he went outside the house to work, but he didn't participate in the house. And they were young, so thankfully I don't think they remember that. But I caught it pretty early. And so I started to let him do morning carpool. And it was real comical at first because he basically at like school age had to figure out how to get them ready, do breakfast. And I started to work early. And so I could be home earlier. And this is a breaking of a generational trauma. I had to let go, and it wasn't perfect. But the more that I let him participate, the more that they were, first of all, much happier in the morning because perfectionistic mom who's screaming to hurry up and look right and get everything perfect out the door wasn't the start to their energetic day. Dad was fun and played music and probably let him have like Cocoa Puffs and barely brushed their hair. And
that was a mistake I made as well. Betsy had the morning routine, and it was, can't tell you how many times I'd be walking out the back door, and all I could hear was just screaming and yelling in the background, and I would just close the door and listen to the peace outside and think, I am not going back in there. Those people are crazy.
And so I think that's what happens. So if you keep the gap and you don't discuss needing help and you don't ask for help,
yeah, you just run away.
You run with this generational trauma where the men...
in fact, I would only intervene when I thought there was...
You avoid it, right?
Well, yeah, you avoid it. But I would intervene if I thought... And
we resent the hell out of you for that.
If I thought physical violence was close, which happened not uncommonly. You could hear it kind of escalate, and I'd be like, I think they're about to hit each other or something, and then I would intervene. But, yeah, it was... in fact, my oldest daughter and Betsy every morning was... I remember one morning it culminated because they were always late, right? And they were always late because they weren't ready. And the truth is the person that wasn't ready was Betsy. And my kids did not say anything about it for a long time. And once Kate got a little older, they were screaming at each other. And Betsy was yelling, we're late again. I've got to take you out of school. I'm going to be late. And Kate goes, we're late because of you. And Betsy lost it. I intervened because I thought she was going to strike her. It was so scary. She was so mad. It was intense.
Well, I think it's really hard when your daughter calls you out on your own generational trauma. And my daughter is only 11, but it's coming. Like, she'll remember.
For sure.
She says funny things like, I'd like to say that I specialize in widows and being a bad widow at that in the very beginning. All widows go through a period, I believe, unless you are incredibly, got your shit together, which I felt like I kind of had my shit as together as one could as a widow, which is, not together at all. You're going to lean on something to ease the pain. That's just going to happen. And I hope it's, overworking out or something cool or, meditating too much. But most likely, if you're like the rest of us, alcohol tends to be a real easy coping strategy. Pandemic hit 6 months after Carl died, and alcohol runs, talk about some generational trauma, that rips through my entire family line. And so I grew up with everyone drinking to like have fun, and drinking when you're happy and drinking when you're sad. Everything was celebrated with a glass of champagne. And I have had to untangle my relationship with alcohol to figure out, like, wow, this is really actually a generational trauma for like lines and lines and lines and lines of our family, that it is not a healthy coping strategy. And in fact, actually, it is probably the worst one possible, but it is cheap, and it does numb.
Socially acceptable too.
And very socially acceptable. And I've actually lived in communities that happen to be highly Catholic and highly filled with booze. Like New Orleans, I mean, you could literally drink all day long and no one would say one thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, so my daughter would say, like, now, I mean, I forget what is, you know, how she says, she'll be like, do you remember, Mom, when you used to drink, she's like, you can only drink one glass. Like, she definitely has a little generational trauma. If I have a single glass of wine, she'll be like,
She's watching.
She's Hawkeyeing me. And when she was little, like after her dad died, like pandemic hit. I mean, I think everyone in New Orleans and everywhere around the world was probably drinking more than they even drank on an average. So like our averages went up, and I was a new widow with 2 homeschooled kids and had to take my entire business online. And a single mom and a single income earner of a business that closed down. It was a disaster. So alcohol was definitely like helping me cope.
I think the point is she really did not want you to check out.
She really didn't want me to check out was probably the deeper thing. I think it probably scared her. And she would say, like, Mom, do you remember that one time when you drank 3 glasses of wine and you started to talk funny?
Yeah.
And I was thinking to myself, like, oh my God. And this was like 3 years ago when she said this too. Now we've gotten to, I mean, in the last 5 years, a much healthier place with alcohol. I don't really drink as much, and I'm super mindful about my drinking, and it's very rare that I will have 3 drinks of something. But the fact when she said that, it hit me really hard that, like, this is a part of her grief experience. And so I had to have a conversation, and, you know, instead of ignoring it or pretending like it wasn't a thing, I sat her down and had a conversation with her and said, you know, sweetie, you're super right. Like, when Daddy died, Mommy was so sad and so stressed, and it was a very bad decision by Mom because it didn't help. But I drank wine because it made me feel less sad. And I was like, but it wasn't a really healthy less sad, because the next day I'd still be it'd be even more sad. And then I wouldn't be present. And that made me sad because I missed our, you know, full energy together. And so I just told her, like, sometimes adults make mistakes too. And that was a really not great decision of mine. And that now I'm more conscious about drinking wine, and she was able to talk to me if I drank too much wine and it scared her. And so, yeah, you know, and I think, did I break the generational trauma? Who knows? To be determined. But it's something to think about. So as you're working on your own things, it's interesting, like, talk to your kids. Ask them, you know, what their themes are that they feel about you. I mean, don't worry. If you want to get your kids to talk about something, have them talk about your failures. They'll light up and tell you all the things. And try to listen, you know. You're doing the best you can. None of us are perfect. It's incredibly hard. And if you've had a hard life or a hard journey and the world's handed you some strife, like, that makes it even harder to stay present and stay not hitting back into those subconscious stories that have been given in the generational trauma. And I'm really proud of my mom, because I think, like, we are having deep conversations about hard things, and even though she might have to take a sensory break from me being so open, I'm seeing a lot of change in us in the way that I'm able to tell her, and I'm lucky that she's so present and able to hear it without it. In the past, it would have put her right back into a depressive state, and now she's in a good place in therapy and is really like, you know, I did the best I could, and your dad was narcissistic and overworked, and I was depressed, and we had a lot against us, and both of us came to the marriage with so much generational trauma and no therapy and no help and no resources and poor coping strategies, and it imploded their marriage, and they loved each other very much. And this is what happens when you don't heal from generational trauma or trauma in general. So our recommendations are, get a therapist. If you want to work on it internally, somatic work. I love somatic work. Somatic work just means embodied practices, so things being inside the body. Physical activity will heal a lot of stress and anxiety and help the body heal a lot. So walking, running, tennis. Everyone knows Pilates is my favorite thing in the world to do. Yoga, anything to move your body and be in your body, where you can get out of your head. But more importantly, somatic work is actually just sitting inside of yourself and feeling the sensations in your body, tracking what's called your felt sense experience, understanding your tolerance level in stress, and trying to bring your stress level back to a tolerable space. So where you're not driving from the stories in your head and these generational wounds, and you're not reacting to a place of dysregulation and taking you away from connection. And these are really the places to work and get a good trauma therapist. I love trauma therapy. My therapist does AIT, which is really cool, and I love EMDR therapy. It's probably the most studied and the most deep form of uncoupling your trauma and getting you to be able to actually function and deal with it. So look for EMDR therapists out there. There's a lot of cool reading on generational trauma, especially from the mother lineage. So much we could talk about.
Yeah. Well, we rambled a little bit today.
We did ramble today. We've had a busy day.
It's a big topic, though. That's it's kind of hard to cover that in a short period of time. And it's hard to stay focused on it, too, because it's so broad.
Right. It's not one topic. Like generational trauma can be anything. And so if we're talking generational trauma, we could actually, that could be the facet, the hyper focus of our entire podcast. Because, I mean, actually, the truth is a lot of what we deal with in our familial lines and our problems with our family is from the origin of some sort of generational trauma that's been passed down and not healed. And so I will end on a positive note. As we're like sifting through baby names, I've been like thinking of all these names, and I'm not going to reveal a name, but you know, one of the thoughts I've been having about our daughter's name is I wanted to represent women and heads of my family who did not have the opportunity to break generational trauma or cycles of trauma. And I felt like it was super important that we represented, like, from both sides of our family, that I'm going to mother in a different way than I think, you know, I was able to in the past, and Betsy was able to in the past, and my mother and my grandmother and everyone in my family that, you know, came, that at least I'm aware of, and that I can name our daughter to represent and to remind me that, like, it is my job on this earth to mother with the fullest of intention and presence, and that I am going to do my best to stay connected and loving to her. There will be problems, like there always is, but I wanted to have a name that I remembered, to think about how all these women before me, you know, and who've passed in our lives didn't get the chance to sift through a lot of this. And if you're out there and you have a lot to sift through, you know, this is a perception shift. I don't often talk about reframing, but I do like reframing in this. I don't like toxic positivity where you make things in your nervous system feels like you're forcing positivity. That's not good and it's not honest. But this is an honest way where you say, like, so much shit has happened to me and so many things have happened to the women ahead of me, right? And the women in front of me who I am responsible for, right? I'm responsible for my daughter, my daughters, my stepdaughters from here on out, and helping reframe, you know, what I can for them. And I am responsible for breaking some of this very heavy things that have been handed to my mother and my mother's mother, and maybe even Kate, you know, from her mother and her mother's mother. If I can, you know, if she is open to it. You know, the difference with a stepchild is they have to be open and ready to, and you have to have a safe enough relationship to be able to get there. And I think we do. And I'm able to know that, like, I get to try again, and I get to, every day is there a chance to say, hey, I didn't do a great job here. And I'm going to try to do better with the girls in my house, so that maybe when they're mothers, you know, we'll have less generational trauma or new generational trauma that I've probably brought on. Yeah. So good luck to you out there. It is a gift to be able to work on yourself. We come and sit in the seat. You know, sometimes I've been working on our vision for the company and, like, potentially writing a book this next year, and all these things are coming up, and we're having a lot of opportunities, and we're having a lot of decisions to make as we bring in baby. And what I'm coming to is that we talk about being a widow all the time, but that is my expertise lane. That is David's expertise lane of healing, is we are coming from a death space. And as widows, let me remind you, and I was thinking, like, this is why I'm emphatically doing what I do, is because we have the opportunity to be alive. And two people that we loved very deeply do not anymore. And they did not get the chance to fix and heal and embrace and break lineage and generational trauma. And we do. And anyone out there who has ears to listen or can translate this in any sort of way and can get this podcast or can get any material that's of healing nature, if you are alive and there's a heart beating in your chest, you have the opportunity to heal. You have the opportunity to work on yourself. You have the opportunity to fix anything that's been handed in your family, in your generational trauma, in your personal trauma. And every day is a gift, and it's an opportunity to change. So cheers to that, because that feels hopeful in a world that feels sometimes not so hopeful. So take that, chew on that for a little bit, and just think about that. We have time.
Yeah.
We have space.
And don't forget to like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe. All right, keep following us. We got one more week in the Mother Month, and then we're moving on to dads. It'll feel good to get to the men's side of things. Thank you to the moms out there who have had to listen to 4 full weeks of us talking about moms. So we love you both, and we're very grateful.
We'll see y'all next time.
Bye.
This has been Wake the F Up podcast, hosted by Alix and David Long. Be sure to check out other episodes where our community of experts share tools and ideas to help you wake to the life inside of you. If you enjoyed this episode of Wake the F Up, please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Join the Wake community by downloading our app. Just search for The Wake Wellness in the Apple or Android App Store. And follow us on Instagram at The Wake Wellness. Thanks for listening.